All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Shvat, the Elbaum Mishpacha, for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month in commemoration of the yahrzeit of their beloved husband and father, Jerry Yaakov Kappel ben Avram Menachem, Zichrona Livracha. To thank Bracha Strimber for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month in loving memory of her husband, Avi Strimber, Avram ben Kalman Eliezer Halevi. We thank our Week of Learning sponsor, Moshe and Ellen Gevant, in memory of Anne Ellen's mother, Joyce Rubin Blockman, Nechama Bas Shalom Yitzchak, on the occasion of her third yahrzeit, and Mr. Larry Sufnis for dedicating the Week of Learning in memory of his beloved wife, Tanya, Yona Bas Yaakov. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah, and the families ein nechama. We'll say with that, let us begin. A beautiful daf, a lot of Gemara ahead of us today. Today's daf is Samech Tes 69, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem on Samech Tes Amud Beis 68b. So we'll say we are picking up in Meretz Hashem at the two dots, Amar Rebbe Lozer. So it's about 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, about 26 lines up from the bottom. So also, if you remember again, we saw the really fascinating machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua about the nature of Yom Tov. Rabbi Eliezer explained that Yom Tov is an either-or experience. Rabbi Eliezer says either a person has the ability to go ahead and the ochal oshosa, o yoshev vishona. Either one has the ability to transform Yom Tov ultimately again into a physically enjoyable experience or a spiritually enjoyable experience. Whereas Rabbi Yoshua explained chalkeu, you have to split it. Chatziav lachem, v'chatziav laHashem. So now the Gemara goes into that machlokes just a little bit. So we already saw that they both go ahead and darshan psukim. One pasuk says atzeres laHashem elokecha, and one pasuk says atzeres tihya lochem. So which one is it? Is the atzeres for Hashem? Is the atzeres lochem? So that's the machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer says you could choose, and ultimately Rabbi Yoshua says you split it. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Akol modin ba'atzeres deba'ino lochem. Supposed to say this is very beautiful. Now we're going to take this discussion and kind of bring it down to specific Yom Tov. So Rabbi Eliezer says everyone agrees on atzeres. But I will say now atzeres in this particular context is a reference to Shavuos. Everyone agrees that on Shavuos there must be an element of personal enjoyment. We'll call it material or physical enjoyment. So the Gemara says, my time, Rabbi said, this is so beautiful. In other words, even Rabbi Eliezer, right? Remember again, this is Rabbi Eliezer talking. Even Rabbi Eliezer, who said that on Yom Tiv, if you choose to make it a kulo laHashem, you decide, you know what? I'm not focusing on su'udos, I'm not focusing on meat and wine, I'm going to spend the whole day in the Beis Medrash. So Rabbi Eliezer says you could do that. Comes along Rabbi Eliezer, says, that's true, but not on Shavuos. Listen to this. Everyone agrees that on Shavuos, there must be an aspect, an element of physical celebration on Yom Tov. Why? My taima, Yom Shenitna B'Torah. Because it is the day that Torah was given. So we'll say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Deba'ina nami lachem, sheyismach bo b'machal u'mishta, laharos shenoach u'mekubol yom zel Yisrael, shenosna Torah. Supposed to listen to how beautiful this is. Because the idea of Allah is saying over here that on Shavuos, everyone has to demonstrate that they are so happy that they have Torah. How do you demonstrate that you're so happy you have Torah? Meat and wine. Celebratory. In other words, you would think the best way to celebrate Torah is how? Learn it. That's true, but the truth is a lot of people learn and they're miserable. But most people, when they're eating a nice meal, are pretty happy. So the idea is I have to do something to go ahead and demonstrate my incredible joy in learning Torah. So therefore, even those who claim that by other Yomim Tovim, you could have a kulo laHashem, on Shavuos, there must be at least a chatzi lachem as well, which is really incredible. Amar Rabba says, Hakol ba'inam b'Shabbos, deba'inam nami lachem. Rabba says, even on Shabbos, everyone agrees that there must be an element of lachem. My taima, v'karasa laShabbos oneg. Because Rabba said, the pasuk says, Navi Yeshaya, you will call the Shabbos a delight. Shabbos said, we know this. There's a din of Oneg Shabbos, and the din of Oneg Shabbos demands that we physically enjoy the Shabbos. Again, through beautiful sudos, through Menucha on Shabbos. Amar Rav Yosef, Hakam Modim B'Purim. Well, so this is very exciting. Now again, it's Shloshim Yom. Right now, again, it's post Tu B'Shvat. Right there, 16th day of Shvat. We're within Shloshim Yom. Purim is exactly 4 weeks from today. So now we have a Gemara on Purim. Rav Yosef says everyone agrees by Purim that you have to have lachem, that you have to have an element of physical joy. My taima, yimei mishta v'simcha ksiv bei. Because again, the Megillah says that there are days of celebration. Mar Brid Ravina, so listen to how beautiful this is. Mar Brid Ravina, kula shasav yosef etanisa. Mar Brid Ravina, he fasted the entire year. Now, of course, it doesn't literally mean he fasted the entire year. What it means is he fasted throughout the year. Lebar me'atzarta upuria umale yom kipuri, with the exception, of course, of Shavuos, Purim, and Erev Yom Kippur. Now, I'll say what he did on Shabbos is an interesting discussion. Amongst the Rishonim, but we don't have to get into that now. The idea over here is that he did not fast on these 3 days that we just mentioned. Shavuos, Purim, and Erev Yom Kippur. So the Gemara says, Atzeres Yom Shenitna B'Torah. It doesn't fast on Shavuos because, again, you have to physically demonstrate that you are overjoyed about the reception of the Torah through physical enjoyment. Yom Shenitna B'Torah. We'll say also, the idea of feasting on Shavuos is also part of the incredible Hashkafas HaTorah, that what Torah allows us to do is to be ma'ala the chomer, is to take that which is physical and material and infuse holiness into it. So feasting by itself could be something very mundane and very unholy. But ultimately, again, when done through the prism of Torah, could become a form of avodas Hashem as well. So the Gemara says, Purim we spoke about before. I'm sorry, Tzaris Yom Shenitna B'Torah, Puria Yimei Mishta V'Simcha. Ksiv on Purim it says there are days of celebration. Male Yoma de Kippuri. What about Erev Yom Kippur? The Tanichia Barav Midifti V'Inisim Es Nafshosechem B'Tisha L'Chodesh. The pasuk says by Yom Kippur, you shall afflict your soul on the 9th of the month. So the Gemara says, the 9th of the month, you don't fast on the 9th of the month. We fast. Yom Kippur is the 10th of Tishrei, not the 9th of Tishrei. Rather, what do we learn? But it teaches us a very important halacha. That's what? That those who go ahead and eat on the 9th, it is considered as if they have fasted on the 9th and the 10th. So the Torah is going to say, you don't fast on the 9th, but eating on the 9th is such a mitzvah that it's ki'ilu. If you eat on the 9th, you would go ahead and it's as if you fast on the 9th and the 10th. Well, also, we've seen this before. The Gemara Maseches Yoma brings down different Tanam and Amoram who would walk around the whole day with like a sucking candy, right? In order to go ahead and be engaged in the act of achila throughout the day. There are some mitzvahs, Baruch Hashem, that are very easily attainable. So we'll say, listen to how beautiful this Gemara is. Rav Yosef b'yom tzarta. So Rav Yosef on Shavuos, Amar, Ivdili igla tilsa. Make for me an igla tilsa. We'll say, so you've seen igla tilsa. It either means a third-born calf, or it could mean a calf that has reached 1/3 of its maturity. Either way, it's a delicacy, right? Igla tilsa was like the finest delicacy in the times of the Gemara. So Rav Yosef would say, on Shavuos, make for me an igla tilsa. Amar, he said, this is so beautiful, I lo hayoma de kagarim, were it not for this day, kama Yosef ika beshuka. Were it not for this day, how many Yosefs would there be in the marketplace? Now, I'll say, what does this mean? What Rav Yosef was saying was something so beautiful and incredibly profound. What makes me special? What makes me special? See, Rav will say, what makes me special in this world? What makes me special is my Torah. Because Rav will say, if you think about it, everything else you have in life, right? Whatever abilities or skills you have, those are not yours. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you them. Of course, you could fine-tune them, right? You could hone them. But at the end of the day, if I have intellectual ability, I have athletic ability, those are things given to me by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That doesn't make me me. That doesn't make me me. I could put in my ishtadlus to make it better. The only thing that makes me me is my spiritual identity. Because at the end of the day, that is the one thing that I control. Hakol b'di shamayim chutz miyer shamayim means the only thing I control in this world is my ruchnius. I put in ishtadlus, effort, in all of the other areas. But the only thing I actually control, at the end of the day, after 120, when you want to know what your truest accomplishments are, I will say, think about this, right? Person has a beautiful mishpacha. Well, again, only HaKadosh Baruch Hu can make that happen. Right? If I have that bracha, if I don't have, so even the things that we normally think about as our accomplishments, it's not really me. I put in the hishtadlus to help things happen. But by ruchnius, the spiritual identity I cultivate, that's me. That's me. That's the Akol B'Yishayim Chutz B'Yishayim. So amazingly enough, Rav Yosef says over here, he had a special celebration for Shavuos. Because he said, were it not for Torah, I would just be another face in the crowd. What makes me? How many Yosefs would there be in the shuk? Right? There are plenty of people who are good at many different things. But at the end of the day, what distinguishes us one from the other is the quality of our spiritual persona. It's an incredible Gemara. Kami Yosef Iko B'Shuka. Rav Yosef Rav Sheshes Kol Tlasin Yomin Mahadrele Talmuda V'Tali Be'Ivr Dashba. Isn't a great Gemara? Rav Sheshes, every 30 days he would review all of his learning. Can you imagine that? Right? Every 30 days he would review his learning. Okay, and what would happen? Vitali v'koi be'ivra dedasha. He would then stand in the doorway. Va'amar chadoi nafshay. He would announce, my soul rejoice, my soul rejoice. L'cha kari l'cha tanai. I have learned for you. I have learned for you. Other words, Krayis Pesukim, Tanai's Mishnayos. What Rav Yosef, what Rav Sheshes was saying was, he was announcing to his neshama, look how much I do for you. Right? I learn for you, I learn Chumash for you, I learn Mishnah for you. I do all of these things to benefit you, my soul. So the Gemara says, Ini, is that so? Is that so? That a person learns for his own benefit, for the sake of his soul? Rabbi Elazar says, were it not for Torah, the earth itself would not endure. In other words, Torah learning is necessary to sustain the entire earth. It doesn't just sustain your neshama, it sustains the earth. So Rosa, listen to this phrase. Your Gemara says, you're right. You're right, Rabbi. Say Torah does sustain the world. But to be very honest, when we begin to learn, most of us don't begin to learn for the sake of sustaining the world. But rather, again, we begin to learn for what? For the sake of sustaining ourselves. So the Gemara says, Beikara, from the beginning, Ki Avid Inish, when a person learns Torah, Adaita Dinafsheka Avid. He does it for himself. He does it for himself, which Rabbi said, the Gemara is espousing something very profound. At the end of the day, the reason we do the things we do in life is because they are self-serving in some way. Now, I know that sounds like a little bit base, but it's not. At the end of the day, when we approach any life endeavor, generally what we say is, what's in it for me? That's generally the way it works. Now, hopefully the goal is that we graduate past that. That's the goal. But the Gemara is saying we can't ignore human nature. And human nature is, I'll do something, I'll engage something, but most of the times not for altruistic purposes. I'll do it because there's some type of benefit. And I both say this, the secret to success in life, well, I don't know what the secret to success in life is, but I would think that one of the secrets of success in life is being honest with yourself about yourself and being honest about your motivations. I'm not an altruistic person. I try to be altruistic, but lamais, at the end of the day, when I do things, they definitely have some self-serving purpose. And by the way, sometimes that self-serving purpose, sometimes that sounds sinister. Self-serving purpose could just be, I want to feel good about myself. I want to feel good. So I'm going to help out Plony. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Because I just want to feel good about myself. That's also called self-serving. That's not a bad thing. But Lamaisa, to be aware of our motivations. So isn't this incredible? Torah sustains the universe. Is that the reason most of us learn? No, I'm not going to take a show of hands. No. The reason most of us learn is because, again, maybe I want schar, maybe I want reward. Or I think for many of us, because we feel good about ourselves when we learn. Because I feel good about how I'm building my neshama. And I feel good about how I'm building my identity when I learn. So the Gemara says, okay, you're right. So, and that's what Rav Sheshes was saying. Rav Sheshes was saying, neshama, look what I do for you. Look what I do. All of this chumash, all this is all for you. I said, really? Do it all for you? What about the earth? What about this? What about sustaining the world? Sure, yeah, that's good too. That's good too. I'm happy to sustain the world. But lamaisa, When I start out on my spiritual journey, my primary motivation is what could I do for me? An incredibly profound Gemara. Amar Rashi. So we'll say, Rabbi Eliezer Yom Tov Nami Yom Tov Rishus Islay Pircha. So we'll say, so remember again. Let's go back for just a moment. Now we're heading back to the Mishnah. So remember again, we're now coming to the end of the Mishnah, where the Mishnah recorded a whole number of a back and forth between Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yoshua, about how we learn out the different things in Yom Tov, or I should say on Erev Pesach that falls out on Shabbos, what should be permitted, what shouldn't be permitted. So Amar Rashi, Ulumayda kam Rabbi Eliezer nami Yom Tov Rishus Islay Pircha, that which Rabbi Eliezer said about Yom Tov has a pircha. What did Umay Yom Tov shehitir bo malacha shel Rishus lo hitir shvus shima. Remember again, Rabbi Eliezer said that a Yom Tov you're allowed to engage in what's called the Rishus, meaning what? That I could do malacha on Yom Tov even for quote-unquote non-mitzvah purposes. Now remember, what does it mean non-mitzvah purposes? Just my own mundane needs. My own mundane needs. So that Kal V'chomer has a pircha. What's the pircha? So the Gemara says, Lo hitir shvus she'ima, Shabbos shlo hitir ba'ela malacha shal mitzvah, Eino din shlo tatir shvus ima. So certainly Shabbos, where again halacha l'maisa, I'm not allowed to do any malacha, right? I'm not allowed to do any malacha, even malacha for a mitzvah. Certainly dinei d'Rabbanan apply as well. Top of Samech Tes, Rabbi Eliezer, shvus the mitzvah adiflei. Rabbi Eliezer will say that it's true, but at the end of the day, allowing a shvus related to a mitzvah still will take precedence. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer, Umali. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer says as follows. And what am I supposed to say to this? How should I retort? Im dachu machshirei mitzvah shala achar shchitas haShabbos. So we'll say, if we see that what? Machshirei mitzvah that take place after Shchita or Docha Shabbos, the Avid Le Mitzvah. Because I will say, now remember again, what they're referring to over here is as follows. When we look at the list of items that are permitted after you shech the Karban Pesach. So it is interesting to note as follows. You do the Shchita, right? And then after the Shchita, there's a whole bunch of other, technically speaking, Isurei D'Rabbanan that will be permitted. Right? For example, again, we're going to discuss exactly why they're Yisrei D'Rabbanan, but for example, the squeezing out of the intestines, the burning of the fats. So the Gemara says something very interesting over here. We are allowing machshirei mitzvah, we are allowing ultimately, again, these other smaller prohibited acts even after the shechita is done. Im dachu machshirei mitzvah shela achar shchitas haShabbos, this avevei mitzvah. Sibbo said, I could have made the argument like this. Maybe machshirei mitzvah should only be allowed on Shabbos of Erev Pesach when they precede the shechita. But once the shechita is done, maybe everything else should have to wait until after Shabbos. So lo yitchu machshirei mitzvah shelifnei shchitas haShabbos. So if you're going to allow machshirei mitzvah after shechita, should you also not allow machshirei mitzvah before the shechita? Amar Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says, Demali imdachu machshirei mitzvah shela achar shchitas haShabbos shari dachsa shchitas haShabbos. Tomar yitchu machshirei mitzvah shelifnei shchitas haShabbos shelo dachsa shchitas haShabbos. So we'll say, Rabbi Akiva gives a very interesting retort. He says, no, the logic could be as follows, that halacha l'maisa, it could very well be, everyone will agree that shechita of the Karban Pesach is permitted on Erev Pesach that falls on Shabbos, right? Everyone agrees that. We already proved that from Psukim. So Rabbi Akiva says like this, maybe the logic is as follows. Once shechita comes along and sets aside Shabbos, activities that follow shechita are automatically permitted. Because it's almost as if shechita has come along and paved the way for carbonic activity. But maybe before shechita, machshirei mitzvah will not be permitted. Why? Because there is no act that has come along yet and paved the way for quote-unquote violation of Shabbos. Davra achar, another possibility is, Shema yimatzei zevach pasal, v'nimtza mechalal es haShabbos l'mafreya. Furthermore, there's another issue. The other reason why we shouldn't allow you to engage in machshirei mitzvah before, we'll say, for example, remember, one of the things you can't do with Karban Pesach is you can't bring it from outside of the Tchum. That's an example, ultimately, again, of machshirei mitzvah lifnei hashchita. So Rabbi Akiva is suggesting that maybe you can't do machshirei mitzvah before shchita because you need a dramatic act almost to borrow a parsha allusion, to kind of split the waters of Shabbos. You need a dramatic act to say ultimately again that Shabbos is set aside and therefore you could pursue this carbonic course. But machshirei mitzvah before the shechita, there's no dramatic act to split the waters of Shabbos. Furthermore, Rabbi Akiva says there's something else, which is what? What happens if we allow machshirei mitzvah before Shabbos? Before shechita, then what could happen? What happens if you then shech the animal and the animal is unfit for carbonic use? Then it turns out that what? Shema yimatzei zevach pasol. Maybe again, the animal will be a treifa, or the carbon won't be good. V'nimtza mechalal es haShabbos l'mafreya. And if you've done machshirei mitzvah before the shechita, it turns out that what? You've actually violated the Shabbos. Retroactively, you violated Shabbos. Versus, whoa, hold on to that, because ihachi mishchat nami lo nishchat shema yimatzei zevach pasol v'nimtza mechalal es haShabbos l'mafreya. 1 second. If you're going to use that argument that we are concerned that maybe the carbon is going to be found to be unfit, and therefore it turns out that you're mechalal Shabbos, the truth is, why do we even allow shechita altogether? Right? Why don't we just say you can never shech the carbon on Shabbos? Because we'll say it turns out that if the animal is unfit, which by the way, of course, you don't know till you open up the animal. Obviously, an animal could have some simani treifas externally, but more often than not, when you find an animal to be a treifa, that is an internal injury. You find something on the lungs or something else. You don't know that until you open that animal up. So why don't we say you should never be able to shech the carbon on Pesach, because the animal may be pasul, and halacha l'maisa, it turns out you've done a malacha for no purpose. To which the Gemara says, Ella. So obviously, we don't say that. Obviously, we don't subscribe to that idea, because we do offer up karbanos on Shabbos. Ella ha amar le bereisha, uparche bahadra amar le ha demali. Rather, the Gemara says, you're right, just switch around the order ultimately of the dialogue. Fine. Heishiv Rabbi Akiva va'amar haza'ah tochiach. So we'll say Rabbi Akiva comes along and he says, we can prove from haza'ah. So we'll say, so remember again, this line in the Mishnah was as follows. Rabbi Akiva says, haza'ah tochiach, Shehi mitzvah, she mishum mitzvah, v'hi mishum shvus, ve'ino dochas haShabbos. We'll say, so Rabbi Akiva wanted to suggest as follows. Rabbi Akiva said, you could see we don't allow hazah. Now hazah, sprinkling, is referring to the individual who is tamei tumas meis, right? Tamei tumas meis, who requires a sprinkling of the paraduma waters on day 3 and day 7. Let's say, for argument's sake, day 7 falls out on Shabbos, which is Erev Pesach. We do not sprinkle the water on him on Shabbos. Now, we'll say, what's wrong with sprinkling the water on a guy who's tummy on Shabbos? What's wrong with it? So remember again, we saw this in Rashi in the Mishnah. Tikkun mana, tikkun gavra. It has the appearance of fixing something. Or saying a little bit differently, changing the state of an item from one state to another. Has the appearance of tikkun mana, fixing an object. Therefore, sprinkling on the individual who's tamei ultimately is an Isid Rabbanon. So Rabbi Akiva says something amazing. Rabbi Akiva says, you see, that although sprinkling is a mitzvah, it is Asr Midrabanon, and it's not Docha Shabbos. It's not Docha Shabbos. So to Rabbi Akiva will say these other activities mentioned in the Mishnah, which are also Isrei Drabanon, and although they're mitzvah related, you can't do them on Shabbos. To which the Gemara says, Tanya, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva, B'shchite Sheftani. So Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Akiva, so I'm sorry, so that then the Gemara, there's one more piece of the exchange. Rabbi Eliezer says, it doesn't make sense, and I'll tell you why. Because if shchita, which is a malach, is docha Shabbos, then certainly again these smaller activities, which are only asr midrabanan, should be docha Shabbos as well. To which Rabbi Akiva said, or I could flip that on his head. Maybe I'll say that if hazah, if sprinkling the waters of the paraduma is going to be asr on Shabbos, then what? Certainly shchita should be asr on Shabbos as well. Now I will say, Rabbi Akiva obviously doesn't mean that, because everyone knows that carbonic shchita is permitted on Shabbos, right? Even carbon Pesach, carbon Tom, we know that. So Rabbi Akiva was just trying to make a hyperbolic point. Now here's what's interesting. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Akiva, b'shchita sheftani, Akiva, you tried to slug up my argument with shchita, which you know again is incorrect. B'shchita tehe misaso. Your death should be through shchita as well. So we'll say a very severe statement. Rabbi Eliezer was very upset at Rabbi Akiva because he thought Rabbi Akiva was making fun of him. He thought he was mocking him because Rabbi Akiva advanced an argument that obviously was incorrect. So Rabbi Eliezer took it as a personal slight. Amar lo, Rebbe, al tachbireni b'shas hadin. He said, Rebbe. So Rabbi Akiva responds, Rabbi says, Rebbe, please, do not go ahead and forget that which you told me, that you taught me. Kach mikublani mimcha. This is what you taught me, Rebbe. Hazah shvusu v'nodochas haShabbos. Hazah, sprinkling of the waters of the paraduma on the tummy individual, is aser midrabanan, and it's not dochas Shabbos. It's not dochas Shabbos. I v'chini achar duhu agmarei. My time account. This will say. So Rabbi Akiva was saying to Rabbi Eliezer, Rebbe, you taught us this halacha. So why are you now forgetting? Why are you now ignoring it? You taught it to us. Why are you ignoring it? V'chini achar duhu agmarei. My time account. So now the Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer, if you in fact taught this, why did you retract it? Amra Ula Rabbi Eliezer ki agmarei hazah de truma agmarei de truma gufa lo dachya Shabbos. Oh, we'll say, watch this. When Rabbi Eliezer taught this halacha that you cannot sprinkle waters on the individual who is tamei tumas meis, that was if the individual wants to eat truma. So we'll say, what if you have the following situation? Kohen wants to eat truma. Kohen can't eat truma in a state of tumah. So what does he want to do? He's tamei tumas meis. Day number 7 of his sprinkling is Shabbos. He wants to get sprinkled with the waters of the paraduma. Rabbi Eliezer says you can't. And I will say, why not? Why does Rabbi Eliezer say you can't do the sprinkling? Because truma itself cannot be separated on Shabbos, right? You're not allowed to separate trumas and maasros on Shabbos, because once again, it's Isser Midrabanan, it looks like you're fixing an item. So since you can't separate trumas and maasros on Shabbos, Rabbi Eliezer said you also can't be sprinkled with waters of paraduma on Shabbos. In other words, that's where you can't sprinkle. Rabbi Akiva nami ki osva hazad de truma osvei. Shehi mitzvah v'hi mishum shavus. Rabbi Akiva was also raising this exact point. Rabbi Akiva was saying, you can't sprinkle the paraduma waters in order to eat truma, even though again it's a mitzvah and it's also midrabanan. But who saw Rabbi Eliezer thought hazah de pesach kamosivla. So also Rabbi Eliezer says that the Gemara says Rabbi Eliezer thought that Rabbi Akiva was talking about hazah of carbon pesach, which of course he was not. I will say a very profound Gemara. So you see that a misunderstanding. Right? How many times in life do we have strong reactions to people, unwarranted strong reactions to people, because we misunderstand their intentions or we misunderstand their words? So here Rabbi Eliezer thinks that Rabbi Akiva is going ahead and speaking in such a disrespectful tone, but it turns out that he really misunderstood what Rabbi Akiva was trying to say. Masib, Rabba, Hishav Rabbi Akiva, Amar Hazat Tami Meis Tochiach. So here's the problem. We have an alternate version, and this alternate version, Rabbi Akiva is not talking about Hazar for Truma, but rather, again, he's talking about Erev Pesach. Rabbi Akiva says, Hazaz tamemes tochiach shechal shvi shalalios b'Shabbos ube'erev Pesach shi mitzvah v'him mishum shvos ve'ena dochas haShabbos. Rabbi Akiva says, I'll bring you a raya that machshirei mitzvah are not dochas Shabbos. What's the raya? If Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos and you have an individual who's tamei tumas meis and he needs his 7th day sprinkling on a Shabbos, that we don't do it on Shabbos. Rather, what you have to say is that it was in fact Rabbi Eliezer taught Rabbi Akiva that even sprinkling of the waters of the paraduma in order to consume Korban Pesach are not done on Shabbos. But if that's the case, but if that's the case, then why does Rabbi Eliezer seemingly ignore the very ruling that he advanced? Rabbi Eliezer Gemare is aker lei. Rabbi Eliezer forgot. He forgot, I will say. At the end of the day, he forgot that which he taught. So the Gemara Gamre and Rabbi Akiva came along to try to reteach him, to remind him of his ruling. Says the Gemara, so why doesn't Rabbi Akiva just say straight out, Rabbi, you taught us that halacha l'maisa, you can't do the sprinkling of the waters of paraduma for someone who's taught tumas meis, even on Erev Pesach that falls out on Shabbos. Just say it explicitly. Saralav Orchara. So Rabbi Akiva felt it's inappropriate for a Talmud to explicitly say to his Rabbi, I think you made a mistake. Or I think you went ahead and you forgot something that you taught us. Rabbi Akiva actually thought that he was kind of doing the right thing by reminding Rabbi Eliezer in a roundabout way about his mistaken present ruling, but obviously it didn't work too well because Rabbi Eliezer got very offended. He thought Rabbi Akiva was slighting and making fun of him. So the Gemara goes weiter. V'hazah, my time dachi Shabbos. So let's analyze it just a moment. Why is it that the sprinkling of the waters of the Paraduma are not Docha Shabbos? So remember again, somebody has their day 7 sprinkling on Shabbos. We're now establishing it's not Docha Shabbos. Why is that? V'hazah, my time dachi Shabbos. Michti, let's analyze. Tiltulei ba'almahu tidchi Shabbos mishum Pesach. So we're assuming right now that kind of the only thing involved in the waters of the Para Aduma ultimately is just some carrying, right? Tiltul. So what's the problem? To which the Gemara says, let that be set aside ultimately for Pesach. So interesting enough, Rabbah understands that the concern is you may come to carry it. This is actually very interesting. It's a hotzah issue. You may come to carry the water David Amis in Rosh Hashanah. That's why you can't use it. Amar Rabbi Elazar, machshirei mitzvah. So we'll say, okay. So first of all, we already saw in the Mishnah that this might be an additional reason. So it could be that there are 2 reasons to go ahead and prohibit the use of the Para Aduma waters on Shabbos Midirabanan. Possibility that the Gemara is advancing now is we're concerned that you may come to carry it. Dalit Amis in Rosh Hashanah. It's a hotzah issue. Possibility 2, which we saw in the Mishnah, is Tikkun Gavra. That the act of purifying someone who's tamei has the appearance of fixing an individual, which ultimately, again, has the appearance of malacha. Now, we'll say the Gemara begins a fascinating discussion. We'll say, so we do have the concept that machshirei mitzvah are docha Shabbos, right? We do have this concept that we'll call it ancillary mitzvah activities are docha Shabbos, do set aside Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Amri, hani mili hecha de gavra gufei chazi, verami chiyuva alei. That's only when the individual is fit for the mitzvah and the obligation devolves upon him. We'll see the example of this in just a moment. Aval halcha de gavra gufei lo chazi lo rami chiyuvi alei. So we'll say this is incredible. So when do we say that machshirei mitzvah are docha Shabbos? When is that so? When the individual is chayiv in the mitzvah, right? When the individual, not chayiv, I should say, when the individual is fit to perform the mitzvah. Once you are fit to perform the mitzvah, then the mitzvah and potentially ancillary activities related to the mitzvah are permitted on Shabbos as well. But if the individual is not fit to perform the mitzvah, then there is no reshus for machshirei mitzvah. So for example, in this case over here, where you have the individual's tamei tumas meis, he's not fit for the mitzvah. So because he's not fit, therefore, ultimately, the ancillary activities are not permitted. So the Gemara says, let's analyze this. Amar Rabba, L'div Rabbi Eliezer, according to what Rabbi Eliezer just said, Katan bari, mechamel lo chamel lahavroso, v'lamolo b'Shabbos. So Rabbi says, according to this logic, Katan bari, a baby, an 8-day-old baby who is healthy. What's the halacha? You can go ahead and warm up water for him to go ahead and give him a bath before the milah, before the bris, in order to then give him a bris on Shabbos. So Rabbi said, because he's fit. So in other words, I would say, giving him a bath before the milah is machshirei mitzvah. Machshirei mitzvah. So as long as the baby is healthy and ready for the milah, you could even warm up a bath for him before the milah to prepare him for the milah. On the flip side, katan chole, if a baby Rahman Hassan is ill, you can't warm up a bath for him. Why? Because since the baby is ill, therefore again he's not really fit for milah. Because he's not fit for milah, therefore Allah he can't warm up the bath either. So the Gemara says, Ella Amarava, Hakol Cholin Hein Eitzel Milah, Echad Katan Bari ve'Echad Katan Chola, Ein Mechamin Lavroso. V'lamolo b'Shabbos daha lo chazi. To which the Gemara says, no, that's actually incorrect. In other words, a child, an 8-day-old baby, is always considered to be a chola, right? He's always considered to be ill, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, we don't heat up water to give the baby a bath before Shabbos. If the baby is able to go, bath on Shabbos. So therefore, again, if halacha l'maisa again, so we don't warm up a bath to give. So halacha l'maisa, we don't warm up water to give the baby a bath before Shabbos. Before the milah on Shabbos. If the baby would need that, the baby would be classified as a chola, and halacha l'maisa would not be given a milah on Shabbos. The only thing you're allowed to do on Shabbos, we'll say for the Milah, is the actual act of the Milah itself. Of course, again, if after the Milah, Chas V'Shalom, the baby becomes ill, then that becomes a Chodesh Yesh Bo Sakana. That's a different discussion. I mean, that's not related to Milah. But in terms of Milah itself, the only malacha that is permitted to be done on Shabbos is the actual bris itself. Eisvei Abaye. So let's analyze this. Arel Shalom Mal Anush Kares. Devi Rabbi Eliezer. Suppose it's an interesting case. If you have an Arel is an uncircumcised individual who did not circumcise himself on Erev Pesach in order to be able to eat the Karban Pesach, Anush Kares. He's subject to Kares. Subject to Kares because he didn't partake in Karban Pesach. Devi Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says. So Gemara says, 1 second. V'ha de gavra gufa lo chazi v'katani Anush Kares. Alma Rami Chiyuva Iluya. Now, this is very interesting, because think about this for just a moment. What do we just say? If someone is in Arel, and therefore doesn't do the Karban Pesach, he's Chayiv Karis. But why? I will say, if Ruvain's in Arel, then technically speaking, I should say what? He's not Chayiv. Right? Because in Arel is not Chayiv in Karban Pesach. So ultimately, again, how is it that he's Chayiv Karis? So we see from here that even if the individual is not fit to perform the mitzvah obligation still devolves upon him. Amar Rabba, so Rabba said this is very important because remember again, Rabbi Elazar said beforehand that you could only do machshirei mitzvah if the individual is fit. But here we see that even if the individual is not fit to perform the mitzvah, there is still mitzvah liability upon them. So the Arel is not fit to perform the mitzvah. Yet, halacha l'maisa, he's chayiv kares if he doesn't eat the Karban Pesach. Amar Rabba says, Kasar Eliezer, in shoktin v'zarkin al tamei sheretz. So Eliezer holds that halacha l'maisa, we do not do shchita and zrika for someone who has contracted tumas sheretz. Amar Beis, v'chol she'ilu biyachid nitcha b'tzibor avdi b'tuma. This is very interesting. Any case where an individual would be deferred to Pesach Sheni, ultimately, again, if the collective is in this state, the tzibur is in this state, they go ahead and they perform the Karban B'tumah. V'chol milsa di'isei b'tzibur, isei b'yachid. And any state which will affect the tzibur will also affect the yachid. V'chol milsa delesa b'tzibur, but I will say any state that would not impact the tzibur, lesa b'yachid, does not apply on an individual level. So we're gonna illustrate these principles. Arelos, so also listen to this. When it comes to arelos, being an ara, uncircumcised, di'i kulei tzibur arelim ninhu amrinon lahu kumu molu nafshaychu va'avidi pischa. So what's very interesting? Let's say what happens if 51% of Klal Yisrael are arelim? However that would occur. Right, 51% of Klal Yisrael are arelim. So what do we say? What do we say to the 51%? What do you say to them? Get a bris. That's it. Get a bris. You've got a couple of hours until nightfall. Get a bris. So kumi mahulu nafshaychu va'avidi pischa yachid nami amrinale kum mahol va'avid pischa. We say to the so both say you have an individual who's arel on our Pesach. What do we say to him? Get a bris. We'll say, would it be, again, I don't know this to be historically true, but it'd be fascinating to know, like, did they have mo'alim on site? Right? On site. I mean, hopefully not right on site, but, like off-site maybe. Off-site mo'alim. Again, let's say, the notion of an uncircumcised Jew is a very strange thing, especially if you're talking about a Jew who was ola regel. Now, of course, again, we spoke about the idea of mesu echav machmas mila, which is if a person was uncircumcised for medical reasons, that's something else. But again, it's interesting. So, yachinam yamina leikum mal va'avid pischa, v'ilo mal va'avid, and therefore, again, if the individual does not get a bris milah, right, anush karis. Ultimately, I will say subject to karis, because I will say essentially what the Gemara is saying is like this. Arelos is a rectifiable state. Right? You could rectify the arelos. So you say to the individual, go ahead and get a bris. Tuma, di'u kulei tziburei temeinu. So we'll say when it comes to tuma, remember again, what happens if the entire klal is tameh? And when I say entire, it's only 51%. Tuma, when it comes to if the tzibur is tameh, lo madinan alayhu ela avdi betuma. We'll say, so remember again, if 51% of the tzibur is tameh, we offer up to Karban Pesach in a state of tumah. Yachid nami pater. So to Rabbi say, if the individual is tameh and therefore does not do Karban Pesach, he's not subject to kari. So Rabbi say, you hear this interesting principle the Gemara is espousing. Any state where the tzibur essentially again would have to rectify, the individual has to rectify. And therefore, again, arelos. If the tzibur are arelim, we tell them, get a bris milah. The individual is an arel, get a bris milah. And if you don't, you're subject to kares for failure to perform the carbon pesach. Tumah, where if the tzibur was tameh, we would offer up the carbon in a state of tumah. If the individual is tameh and therefore fails to perform the carbon pesach, halacha l'maisa, he's not subject to kares. Arali Rafun B'Rav Yoshua l'Rava B'Hari Pesach Sheni Delay Sebet Tzibur V'Isei B'Yachid. What about Pesach Sheni? Right, to make a Pesach, which as we already saw before halacha l'maisa, does not apply to the tzibur. Right? Remember again, we've seen this because what did the pasuk say? Ishki ish. Pesach Sheni is only a din by individuals, not a din by the collective. So Pesach Sheni Delay Sebet Tzibur doesn't apply to the collective. The Isei B'Yachid does apply to the individual. So the Gemara says, Amalei Shani Hasam Deha Ka'avid Le Tzibura B'Rishon. That's different, I will say, because again, remember, the reason why Pesach Sheni doesn't apply to the Tzibur is because the Tzibur already performed the mitzvah on Pesach Rishon. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, Yachal Lo Yehe Anish Kares El Shahaya B'Derech El Shahaya Tar V'Shalo Haya B'Derech Rechoka Arel V'Tamei V'Sharetz Choshar Tmei Minai. So we'll say, I might have thought as follows. I might have thought that the only individual, Yachal Lo Yehe Anish Kares El Shahaya Tar, I might have thought that the only person who is subject to kares for failure to perform the carbon pesach is as follows. Someone who was tar, wasn't too far away. And I was supposed to say that the only person who's subject to kares for failure to perform a carbon pesach is someone who was in a personalistically pristine state, able to do it, and was in proper geographic proximity. So you had the perfect ability to perform the carbon pesach, but you didn't do so. Failure to perform the carbon with perfect circumstances, that results in kares. However, how do I know Tamei Sheretz, Arel, Tamei Sheretz, Ushar Kol Tamei Minai? How do Rabbi say that's not true? Even if someone is an Arel, or someone is Tamei with a variety of different types of Tumah, and they fail to rectify their state in the current Pesach, then Allah Chalamayse, they're Chayiv Kares as well. Tamalomar, V'ha'ish. The pasuk says va'ish, a general statement ish, which seems to be a catch-all, that essentially if you did not perform the carbon pesach, and because of a particular situation that you could have rectified, but you instead chose not to, and therefore you failed to perform the carbon pesach, that's shechayiv kares, to which the Gemara says va'ish, nidkamahadra tamei sheretz. So we'll say the fact that it says ultimately and includes in here tumas sheretz, kasavra in shochtin v'zarkin al tamei sheretz. The shochtin v'zarkin al tamei sheretz lama lahadurei ala hainu tahar. Because we'll say it would appear to be that halacha l'maisa we don't shecht and do zrika for someone who's tamei tumas sheretz, because if we would, then halacha l'maisa should be included in the case of a regular guy. Ama afa gav de lo chazi chiyuva alei. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that there is a level of carbon, not a level. There is carbonic liability. There's a chiyuv of carbon pesach upon an individual, even though he is currently unfit to give the carbon, to offer the carbon. So we'll say, this is a really fascinating idea. The Gemara's Havamina was, I would have thought that maybe kares, which is the liability for non-performance of the carbon pesach, only applies to individuals who are 1,000% fit to currently offer the carbon. What the Gemara now is suggesting is that even someone who's not currently fit, like an Arel or Tumas Sheretz, so we'll say, why does the Gemara give the example of Tumas Sheretz? Because what's the duration of Tumas Sheretz? What's the duration? Just that day. Right? You touch a dead Sheretz, you go to the mikvah, and that night you're tar already, which means that even if you're Tamei Tumas Sheretz on Erev Pesach, that is a rectifiable state. So therefore the Gemara says, you see from here that halacha l'maisa, even if you are presently unfit, but you have a rectifiable state, and you fail to do so, that's a chiyav kares. Avagav l'sei b'tzibur isei b'yachid. So the Gemara said, we see from here that even though the individual is currently now not fit, and even though again his state does not apply to the tzibur, but it applies to the yachid, failure to rectify his personal state will result in kares. Ela Amar Rava, rather Rava says, Kasav Rabbi Eliezer shochtin v'zarkin al tamei sheretz. Rabbi Eliezer says, you're right. You know what? We do shecht and do zrika on behalf of someone who's tamei tumas sheretz. V'hu adin l'tamei meis b'shvi shalazah. Same thing will be for a person who's tamei tumas meis, who still needs a seventh day sprinkling. So l'mai, La'achila, what will we do it for? Ultimately, again, to permit consumption. Achilas psachim lo ma'akva. Prabhu said the consumption of the Korban Pesach is not ma'akev. Amar Rav bar Ava Rava, imkei nimtza Pesach nishchat shlo liochlav. It turns out, therefore, that Korban Pesach is being shechted for people who will not consume it. Amar lei, shlo liochlav lechola lezakin delo chazi. No. The case of shlo liochlav, Prabhu said, as we saw before, is talking about someone who physically can't eat. Aval hai mechse chazi chakunahu dulomatakim. These individuals are fit for consumption. Well, no, they're not fit for consumption. These individuals are able to consume, but rather, again, there is an actual state that is preventing them from doing those. So Rabbi says, so what turns out over here is that halacha l'maisa, there is liability for a state of Tuman Erev Pesach, or Arelus for that matter, that you could rectify. The only time that you are exempt from Pesach Rishon and ultimately deferred to Pesach Sheni is if you are in an unrectifiable state, derech rechoka, or in the midst of your 7 days of Tumah. That's when ultimately, again, you are deferred. So let's just finish the sugya. Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva. So remember again, Rabbi Akiva said a rule. This is how the Mishnah ends. And the rule of Rabbi Akiva essentially is, when it comes to Korban Pesach being performed on Shabbos, how do you know what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do? Rabbi Akiva says it's very simple. Anything you could have done before Shabbos must be done before Shabbos and can't be done on Shabbos. Only activities which can't be done on Shabbos itself are permitted on Erev Pesach that falls on Shabbos. Shabbos essentially says like this: anything before Shechita, bringing the animal, bringing the knife, all of that could have been done before Shabbos. Therefore, you must do it before Shabbos, can't do it on Shabbos. Anything post-Shechita, and that's part of the sacrificial service, can be done on Shabbos, with the exception of roasting the animal. Roasting the animal, and for that matter, carrying the animal out of the Beis HaMikdash, that can be done post-Shabbos, and therefore must be done. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar Yehuda, Amar Rav, halacha Rabbi Akiva. We'll say the halacha l'maisa, the halacha follows Rabbi Akiva. Therefore, any activity which could have been done before Shabbos must be done before Shabbos. Only those activities related to the Korban Pesach which could not have been done before Shabbos, do you have a license to perform on Shabbos? And the Gemara says, by the way, Utnan nami gabi mila kei agabna. The same halacha follows by bris milah. By bris milah, Rabbi Akiva makes the same statement. Kalal Amar Rabbi Akiva, kol molacha shefshar la'asos me'erev Shabbos ina dochas haShabbos. Mila shefshar la'asos me'erev Shabbos dochas haShabbos. So we'll say, for example, Rabbi Akiva says the same halacha by milah. By bris milah, anything that could not have been done before Shabbos could be done on Shabbos. So we'll say, what's an example of something that cannot be done before Shabbos that has to be done on Shabbos by milah? What's the example? The milah, right? The bris itself. Everything else can be done before Shabbos. You can bring the knife before Shabbos. You can bring the cloths before Shabbos. Bring the diaper before Shabbos. All that has to be done, that can't be done on Shabbos. The only thing that can be done on Shabbos itself, ultimately, again, is the milah, the subsequent bandaging. So the Gemara says, by the way, so now we have two statements, both by Korban Pesach and by milah, that the halacha follows Rabbi Akiva. Same principle. On Shabbos, you are only allowed to do things which could not have been done before Shabbos. But anything that could have been done before Shabbos, halacha must do before Shabbos. So the Gemara says, but why do I need two statements? Sometimes we both say, all you need to do is highlight this principle in one place. So either highlight it by milah or by Pesach, and I could have made this a rule that would apply to all circumstances. I'll tell you why I need both. Because if it would have just illustrated this halacha of Rabbi Akiva by Pesach, so I would have said, Hasam hu demachshirei mitzvah lo dachu Shabbos, misham de lo nichrusu aleh shlosh esrei brisos. Ava milah de nichrusu aleh shlosh esrei brisos. Because we'll say, if it would have just said that halacha of Rabbi Akiva by Pesach, I would have said the stafko by Pesach. But by milah, maybe all activities of milah are doches Shabbos, even if they could have been done before Shabbos. Why? Because Rabbi was saying there are 13 covenants which surround the mitzvah of bris milah. What does it mean 13 covenants? The word bris is mentioned 13 times in the discussion between Avram and HaKadosh Baruch Hu by bris milah, which Chazal understand that there are 13 covenants that are affected when you do bris milah. Something so powerful, something so profound. Maybe I would say that even machshirei mitzvah, which could have been done before Shabbos, are doches Shabbos. Therefore, again, the Gemara has to say that halacha follows Rabbi Akiva, that machshirei milah are not doches Shabbos. Only things which could not have been done before Shabbos are done on Shabbos, but anything which could have been done before Shabbos is not doches Shabbos. V'yashmina milah hasam hu demachshirei mitzvah lo dachu Shabbos deleka kares. Aval Pesach Tika Kares Ema Litri. Therefore, Tzricha. And I will say, if I would have just said it by Pesach, I would have said it's Dafka by Pesach, which carries with it a penalty of Kares. I'm sorry. If I would have just said it by Milah, I would have said it's Milah that Machshire Mitzvah not Docha Shabbos. But by Pesach, which carries a penalty of Kares, maybe even Machshire Mitzvah are Docha Shabbos as well. Kamash Mullah, that's not the case. Therefore, I will say, Halacha L'Mais, we close out the sugya with the Halacha of Rabbi Akiva, namely, again, that Rabbi Akiva holds that in general, we've seen now both by Milah as well as by Pesach, that aspects of the mitzvah which could not have been done before Shabbos may be done on Shabbos. But any part of the mitzvah which could have been performed before Shabbos is not Docha Shabbos. We'll stop over here.